Hello, class. I've spent the last week on my boat, grew my beard out, but now it's time to do some math. Okay, number one. This one looks pretty normal. You just add, you just add 3, and you get v squared equals 4. Take the square root of both sides. Remember the plus or minus. And v equals plus or minus. Since we know what the square root of 4 is 2, you just say v equals plus or minus 2. And that's it. Okay, number 2. Subtract 7 from both sides, and you get r squared is negative this time. So when you take the square root of both sides, of course you remember the plus or minus, but when you take the square root of a negative number, an I comes out. But inside the square root, the I disappears. Don't forget the plus or minus, and you'll get the right answer. Okay, number 3. Subtract 2, and k squared is negative 23. You can tell my kids are a little riled up today. Now you take the square root of both sides.
What'd you do here?
Don't forget the plus or minus.
That's kind of ridiculous.
And on the left side is just k. On the right side, since it's negative, you need an I. But we don't know what the square root of 23 is, so you leave it the square root of 23. Don't forget your plus or minus. Okay? So this one, when you divide by negative 6, n squared is positive 41. Ooh, I gotta make sure I'm right. Sometimes I don't know stuff. What is it? 246. 246 divided by 6. 41. I'm good. Okay. Square root both sides. It's positive this time, so we won't have an I. N equals this. Oh, hello. Plus or minus. Plus or minus the square root of 41. Okay? Now the last two are a little trickier, but it's not too bad. You solve for the squared thing first. Subtract 7, and 2 times n minus 3 squared equals 50. Now we're going to divide the 2. You don't distribute because it's squared. You can't distribute that. So n minus 3 squared is 25. It's positive. That's nice. And then you take the square root of both sides. Don't forget the plus or minus. And n minus 3 equals plus or minus 5. But now, when you add 3 to both sides to get n alone, you have to squeeze it right in there. So n equals 3 plus or minus 5. Then you need to know what numbers those are. Okay? And the numbers are 3 plus 5 and 3 minus 5. Because the plus or minus gives you 2 different things. 3 plus 5, 3 minus 5. So 8 and negative 2. 8, negative 2. Those are the answers. Okay? Now, here's the last one. Add 5 to both sides. A minus 6 squared is negative 53. Look, it's negative, so we're going to have an I. You square root both sides. Don't forget the plus or minus. And you get a minus 6 equals plus or minus. Since it's negative, you're going to take an I out. But when you take an I out, it's no longer negative underneath the radical. And then we're going to add 6 to both sides. And again, when you add 6, you squeeze it in front of the plus or minus. So a is alone. It equals 6 plus or minus I square root of 53. And that is the answer. You have to leave it just like that. Some people will write a decimal, and that's okay to do, right? You could write a decimal here. You can write a decimal here. That's okay to do. Typically, when you have a number that's not a radical, the I would go after the number, even if it's a decimal. But if you leave it as a radical, you just keep it just the way it is.